Despite intense criticism from the United Nations in recent days, the European Union, the Arab League, and other international organizations' plans for annexation are moving forward. There's also intense opposition, of course, from deep within Israel, from both the left wing, which is anti-annexation, but also from within right-wing groups as well. Of course, the reasons for that opposition within Israel between the left and right are different. To explain why, here's I-24 News senior correspondent Owen Alterman.
For Benjamin Netanyahu, it was supposed to be a gift to the Israeli right. The annexation of settlements in the West Bank, telling West Bank settlers that the land they live on is fully part of Israel. As it turns out, the politics are not so simple. And the question of annexation is actually dividing the Israeli right. Most settler leaders actually say they don't want this annexation package. Now, they'd be happy to have settlements become part of Israel, but they're worried about the price. They're worried that in exchange for annexation, Israel will have to agree to a Palestinian state and other concessions. These settler leaders say that's a bad trade. For his part, Netanyahu is still pushing for the annexation. He says it will make it easier to build in the settlements and easier for Israel to keep annexed lands. Some settler leaders agree with him, but the opposition is strong and maybe surprising. With Jordan, the European Union, and so many others against annexation, Netanyahu does not want the settlers themselves to be against it too.
And with me now here on the set, I'm joined by Nir Bartal, who is the mayor of Oranit, and David Ha'ivri, who is a councilman for Shomron. I want to start with you, David. Thank you so much for being with me. I want to ask just a general question. Why is annexation important? I mean, what's wrong with the status quo? We're here at Ariel University. We see a growing, flourishing community. People here are happy. They feel safe. Why does annexation, the extension of official sovereignty, have to happen?
Well, thank you for asking, Jeff. We actually prefer using the terminology extending Israeli sovereignty into this region that Israel has controlled for the past 53 years. It is time that Israel make a clear declaration that this area is the same legally as any other part of the state of Israel and not be in limbo in a temporary status as it has been over the past 5 decades.
The U.S. peace plan, the Trump peace plan, calls for a compromise. Ultimately, Ariel and other major settlement blocks, just like where we are here, they'll be part of sovereign Israel. They'll be officially part of the nation of Israel. But the plan does call for building freezes for several years, and it does allow for the creation of a Palestinian state. Is that a compromise you're comfortable with?
Well, we have a number of concerns with the map and some of the details in the plan that President Trump has suggested. Of course, we have great appreciation for President Trump and for his friendship to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people. But particularly, there are details within this plan that are very dangerous to many of the Israeli towns within Judea and Samaria.
You use the word dangerous. What specifically is dangerous?
Well, we are greatly concerned with towns that would become isolated in caves within the Palestinian Authority. We think that would strangle these towns and ultimately cause these towns to be abandoned. And we can't agree to allow that to happen.
Mayor Bartal, your thoughts?
I don't see the danger as you see it. I think there is a high appreciation of the danger is not correct. Also, first of all, about the Palestinian state. This plan minimize the risk of Palestinian state because it set 10 terms pre to the establishment of the Palestinian state that if the Palestinians will meet them, and only if they met them, the Palestinian state will be and come to life. The Palestinians have another alternative to establish a state without this plan. To get a recognition from the international community without to meet the terms of the plan. So,
but Mayor, if a community doesn't build and grow, then it could die. Are you worried about the freezes in place for several years that gives the Palestinians time to think things over?
It's not true. It's not true that it will be a freeze. The freeze is only meant to be in the 30% in the sea territory that Israeli sovereignty will not apply there. There isn't Israeli settled settle there at all. In all the settler and all the towns, the Jewish and the Israeli town will not be a freeze.
I want to ask David your thoughts on the compromise that the Trump peace plan calls for. As you mentioned, you feel some parts of it are actually dangerous to Israeli civilians and family life in these towns here. But is it a good compromise? Is it perhaps the best that Israel will see for a very long time, and you take the good with the bad?
Again, we have great appreciation for President Trump and his good intentions for Israel and for the people who live here, Jews and Arabs alike. And we understand that the plan lists demands from the Palestinian Authority that they must live up to. Still, we are greatly concerned with setting a precedent. We realize that over the 3 decades of negotiations with the Palestinians, they have never stepped back from their original demands. And any Israeli theoretical concession will be a starting point in future negotiations. And that is where our concerns lie.
Do you have concerns, Mayor, for the people in your community, in Oronit, for their safety? The way things are now, if the status quo is changed dramatically, where sovereignty is extended, do they have concerns for safety, or do you have plans to address those concerns?
Not only I don't have concern, but the safety will be more highly. In Oronit, in all the people that live in Judea and Samaria, because the freedom of action of the Israeli army will be as today.
Your thoughts about the Trump plan, you mentioned before, it's very unlikely that what the Palestinian Authority would have to agree to in order to get U.S. backing for a state they're going to agree to, the ending of terrorist salaries.
We hope
prisons.
they do.
But the fact that it centers the Palestinians, their right to live in 70% of the West Bank as a possible earmarked, saved statehood for them. Is that something, and eventually, you could support anyway? For them to have sovereignty eventually.
Today, the Palestinians live in 40% in A and B territory in Judea and Samaria. The plan, the vision of the plan, that nobody in Israel need to agree to, but need only to make a talk. Only Prime Minister need to agree to make a talk on this plan. Nobody in Israel need to agree to his Palestinian state, but offer the Palestinian the possibility to make a state larger than they have today.
Is it a good plan, the Trump plan? As David mentioned, there are enclaves.
It's not a good plan. It's a great plan.
But what about the concerns of these settlements that would be surrounded totally?
Like I said before, these concerns are not real, I think. People are making up this concern to be against this plan and maybe to achieve some percent more than are offering us today.
Do you agree with that, that the concerns of the enclaves, it's not as immediate as some are saying?
Again, our worries are not if the dangers are immediate or if they are potential by agreeing to these terms. And our issue, I want to be clear, is not with President Trump. Our issue is to make clear to our own government, because we are speaking about Israeli sovereignty, and the person or the organization that makes the decision is the Prime Minister and the government of Israel. So we are speaking out to our own government, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, to a co-Prime Minister Benny Gantz, to make sure that they understand that we have concerns and we want them to hear our concerns and to give us answers for the future and safety of those same communities that could potentially be isolated.
Mayor, you mentioned before, you think this is a great plan. Yes. I mean, is this, there's been reports that the White House team has viewed some of the complaints they're hearing in the media as ungrateful attacks from some settler leaders. Some have said even Trump is not a true friend to Israel. Your thoughts on that?
I'm really sorry that people from Israel and Judea and Samaria made these claims and thought about the Trump administration and Trump himself. Trump is a great friend for Israel and is a great friend for Judea and Samaria.
Those complaints came within the Yesha Council.
I against it. I said it publicly. I said it to the people who said it. And I think that we are seeing him less and less those days because I think they understood it was a wrong thing to say.
What do you think happens? I mean, we could see just, I mean, the beauty of this area and the land behind us. Where do you see this exact spot in 5 years? I mean, we may have a different U.S. president. We may have a different Israeli government. What happens with annexation? How is it going to look different where we are?
I hope Ariel and other towns in Judea and Samaria will develop more, because after applying the Israeli law in Ariel and other places, we can build more freely. Today, if I want to make a new neighborhood, it's very hard politically, and after applying the Israeli law, we can build exactly as in Israel, western to the Green Line. So I hope Ariel and other places will develop more.
Do you share that same optimism? The building can be done freely, and even in a few years, do you share that same optimistic outlook?
In general, they say that the Jewish people are the most optimistic people in the world. And I am optimistic. And I foresee our towns in Judea and Samaria growing and prospering in the future.
And then what would happen with the Palestinian population in the West Bank, maybe who would fall into these areas? Can they truly be separated from Israel? They won't be given the same legal status, but would they be part of a future Palestinian state? They'd be in limbo, wouldn't they?
I believe that Israel needs to extend its sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I don't think that there should be another state established west of the Jordan River.
So then what happens with the Palestinian families who do live in areas now controlled by the PA?
The residents would receive residency, the same as in Jerusalem and in the Golan, in the areas that Israel has already declared sovereignty, and they would have the option to apply for citizenship, like in other places in Israel.
All right, we're going out for a short break here. I want to thank our guests for us on this segment, Nir Bartal, the mayor of Oronit, and David Ha'ivri, a councilman for Shomron. Thank you, gentlemen, both so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jeff.
For this discussion. Great to have you here at Ariel University, again, to discuss the intricacies of the Trump plan and what it means on the ground, really, for places like here in Ariel. Great to have you guys so much. We're going out for a short break, but we're going to continue to zoom in here to more analysis and discussion of annexation, the extension of Israeli sovereignty across the 1967 lines into Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Stay tuned right here for more coverage on this special edition from Ariel University of Zoom In.